General Hospital spoilers. Explosive details over the next 2 weeks, from June 30th to July 11th, tease that after months of swirling speculation and fan theories, the impossible has finally become real. Kelly Thibault has returned to General Hospital in her iconic role as Britt Westbourne. But this is no ordinary resurrection or nostalgic cameo. Britt's reappearance is not wrapped in sentimentality, nor is it framed as a gentle homecoming. Instead, her return detonates a narrative earthquake that sends shockwaves through the very core of Port Charles, especially for Jason Morgan. For Jason, who has lived with the guilt of Britt's supposed death and the scars of everything that followed, her return is nothing short of psychological whiplash. What was once lost now becomes confrontation. What he believed was closure now mutates into chaos. Britt doesn't come back as the same woman who once held his heart, nor does she arrive in secret or shadows. She returns with intention. With fury buried beneath the surface, and with a trove of secrets that threaten to collapse the fragile framework of Jason's current life. This isn't just about love or pain, it's about betrayal, memory, and the uncomfortable possibility that Jason was never truly in control of the narrative that shaped him after her disappearance. Jason had spent months trying to put the pieces of his fractured world together, forging new alliances, navigating hidden wars, and attempting to protect the people he loves without the clarity of knowing which enemy he's actually fighting. And then, just as he starts to believe he's found stability again, Britt re-enters the stage like a storm no one saw coming. Her sudden return is not just a personal bombshell, it exposes a deeper layer of deceit tied to the WSB, Project Phoenix, and the secret biotechnological experiments run by rogue scientists who had manipulated life and death itself. Jason had always feared there were chapters of his past he didn't understand, but never in his worst nightmares did he imagine that Britt's disappearance was orchestrated by the very same network of GL Obel puppeteers he thought he had dismantled. The revelation that Britt was never truly gone, but instead hidden, altered, and conditioned for a greater purpose, forces Jason to question everything. The night he believed she died, the people he trusted, and the memories that might have been tampered with. The woman now standing before him carries the same face, the same voice, even the same fire in her eyes, but there's something darker now, something unreachable, as if time and trauma have hollowed out pieces of her soul. Jason doesn't know whether to hold her or fear her. And Britt offers no easy comfort. She is not there to rekindle an old romance, she's here for answers, revenge, and perhaps even justice for the version of herself that was left behind to die in the shadows. And yet, within that chaos lies something more terrifying for Jason. The realization that Britt may have been part of a larger agenda. Her escape, or release, may not have been an act of freedom at all, but a strategic move orchestrated by someone else. Is she a victim? Or is she now a weapon? Her knowledge of experimental technologies, covert files, and Jason's own classified history makes her both powerful and dangerous. The woman who once loved him now knows too much, and the man who once protected her may now be her greatest threat. As Jason delves deeper into the labyrinth of her reappearance, he uncovers anomalies, falsified death certificates, medical logs signed by doctors who were later found dead, and surveillance footage indicating that Britt may have been moved from one clandestine facility to another under the name Project Astra. Each discovery tightens the noose of paranoia around Jason's neck. He's forced to confront not only the lies he was told but the ones he told himself, about who Britt was, who he is now, and what their connection truly means in a world where memories can be erased and identities reprogrammed. The emotional weight of Britt's return becomes unbearable as Jason's allies begin to question his judgment. Jocelyn, who has been working alongside him to unravel Professor Dalton's secret lab, begins to suspect that Britt's presence could be a diversion. Even Anna and Dante express concern that Jason is too close, too vulnerable, and too reactive to see the larger threat. But Jason, ever the lone soldier, refuses to abandon Britt again, not until he knows the full truth. He revisits the places they once shared, now haunted by the ghosts of what could have been, and forces himself to listen to the impossible, Britt recounting the moment she realized she was alive, restrained, and being monitored by masked doctors who whispered about behavioral calibration and memory rewriting. She tells him of the months she spent in a sterile white cell, waking up only to be injected with drugs that blurred the lines between fantasy and reality. She doesn't remember everything, but she remembers enough. She remembers crying for him. She remembers screaming his name. And she remembers the moment she stopped believing he would come. That moment, she says coldly, was the day Britt Westbourne died, not in body, but in soul. Jason listens, his heart unraveling with every word. He wants to touch her, to convince her that he would have moved heaven and earth to find her if he had known. But Britt no longer deals in what-ifs or apologies. She demands action. She tells Jason she's already located the lab that held her, and that she intends to burn it to the ground, with or without him. The old wounds between them become new battlegrounds. Jason knows that joining her could mean crossing lines he promised never to cross again. But letting her go now, knowing what was done to her, feels like betrayal all over again. As they prepare to confront the remnants of the organization that orchestrated her disappearance, Jason begins to suspect that Britt's return was never meant to be a reunion, it was a trigger. Her presence is waking up memories he doesn't recognize, instincts he thought were long buried, and a rage he can't contain. He doesn't know where this journey ends, only that the person walking beside him is no longer just Britt. She is something forged in darkness, born of betrayal, and shaped by powers far beyond Port Charles. In the days ahead, secrets will bleed, old loyalties will fracture. And the question of who Jason really is, and who Britt has become, will redefine the fate of everyone they care about. And as Britt stares into the flames of the lab that once imprisoned her, she utters one final warning: this isn't the end, Jason. It's the beginning of everything they tried to bury. And for the first time in a long time, Jason believes her. Because some ghosts don't stay dead, and some love stories don't end, they evolve into war. The further Michael pushed Willow away, the more fiercely she clung to the image of a future that no longer included him. With each passing day, her commitment to marrying Drew intensified, not because of love, not because of passion, but because of survival. Willow understood that in the eyes of the law, appearances mattered more than feelings, and in the shadow of a bitter custody war, perception was power. She had once loved Michael with every piece of her heart, but now he was a stranger watching from a distance, silently judging her with every decision she made. His cold detachment wounded her far deeper than any of his accusations, but instead of retreating, Willow resolved to harden. If he wanted her gone, she would leave, and she would do it on her own terms, wearing white and holding Drew's hand before a judge who would decide her children's fate. To the outside world, Willow and Drew looked like the perfect pair. Polished, cooperative, devoted to their blended family. But beneath the polished exterior was a constant state of unease. Their conversations were strained, their silences longer, and their plans increasingly calculated. Drew understood the stakes as well as she did. They weren't just getting married, they were building a legal case disguised as a love story. Every affectionate gesture was deliberate. Every word spoken in public was part of a strategy. And yet, the farther they walked down this path, the more haunted Willow became by what it meant. Still, she couldn't afford to falter. With Nina's quiet meddling and Michael's silent judgment pressing down on her like twin specters, Willow stayed focused on the goal. Nina, never one to walk away from a fight, had made it her personal mission to ensure this wedding never reached the altar. Her methods were subtle, whispers of doubt to the judge, passive-aggressive comments in family settings, carefully timed appearances meant to provoke, but Willow saw through every maneuver. She saw the envy, the control, and most of all, the desperation to stay relevant in a life Nina had already lost her place in. Michael, on the other hand, was a different kind of saboteur. He said little, but his cold glances and avoidance spoke volumes. He wanted her to fail. Not because he didn't love their children, but because some bitter part of him couldn't stand the idea of Willow finding peace without him. He had expected her to break. to come crawling back. But she hadn't. And that defiance only deepened his resolve to paint her as unstable, emotionally compromised, and unfit. Ironically, it was Michael and Nina's sabotage that drove the wedding forward with even more urgency. Willow knew that timing was everything. If they could be legally married before the final court review, it would send a powerful message: stability, unity, and permanence. She began rushing plans, confirming dates, finalizing documents, making sure every box was checked. Drew, though initially hesitant about the speed, quickly fell in line, realizing that any delay would be weaponized against them. Together, they built a house of cards, hoping no gust of truth would blow it down. But storms don't ask for permission. As preparations accelerated, signs of deeper fractures began to appear. Drew became more erratic, more impatient, and more emotionally distant. Willow began noticing late-night phone calls, subtle changes in demeanor, and moments where his charm faded to cold calculation. At first, she dismissed it as stress, the weight of their situation bearing down on him. But then came the questions, the inconsistencies in his version of events, the strange reluctance to involve certain family members. The hints that perhaps Drew was holding back something critical. Willow, always intuitive, began to feel it. The nagging whisper in the back of her mind that said, "This man is hiding something from you." At the same time, her resolve began to take a psychological toll. She told herself she was doing this for her children. That sacrificing her heart was noble if it meant protecting Wiley and Amelia. But in the quiet moments, alone in her room, staring at the dress she would soon wear, she wondered if she was trading one prison for another. Michael's absence had created a void, but Drew's presence didn't fill it, it simply masked it. There were no stolen glances, no shared laughter, no real intimacy. Only duty, obligation, and the echo of what once was. Outside their world, forces continued to collide. Nina discovered documents that could threaten Drew's credibility, sealed transcripts and financial reports that didn't align with the narrative he had crafted in court. She considered releasing them anonymously, knowing full well it could destroy Willow's case. Michael, too, contemplated intervening more directly. He began asking questions, discreetly at first, about Drew's business dealings, about Jacinda, about the real reason Drew was pushing so hard for this marriage. And what he found left him shaken. Drew wasn't just building a legal case, he was building a fortress. One where he held the keys and Willow simply occupied a room. Then came the final blow. A private meeting between Drew and a former WSB associate, overheard by someone close to Jocelyn. The content wasn't fully clear, but the implication was chilling. Drew had connections to players far more dangerous than he'd let on. When Willow heard, she was silent. Not because she was surprised, but because deep down, she already knew. She had seen it in his eyes. The ambition. The calculation. The subtle hunger for control disguised as protection. She had convinced herself he was her safe harbor. But he was merely another storm wearing a calmer face. And still, the wedding drew closer. Publicly, everything looked perfect. The invitations were sent. The venue was secured. Friends and family, though divided, were preparing to attend. But the air around the ceremony crackled with tension, like static before lightning. Willow moved through the motions with practiced grace, but inside, a quiet rebellion was stirring. She was beginning to realize that this wasn't just a mistake, it was a trap. A well-intentioned one, maybe, but a trap nonetheless. She was sacrificing her autonomy, her truth, her emotional clarity for an illusion. The night before the wedding, she stood by the window of her bedroom, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Amelia slept beside her. Wiley was at the Quartermain estate. And Willow, for the first time, wondered if she had become exactly what Michael accused her of being, a woman too broken to trust herself, grasping at structure to avoid the collapse. But just as doubt began to overwhelm her, she made a decision. If she was going to walk down that aisle, she would do it with her eyes open. She would stop pretending. She would stop allowing Drew or Michael or Nina or the court to define her path. The wedding would happen, but the woman standing at the altar would not be a pawn. She would be a reckoning. And as the doors of the chapel prepared to open the next morning, none of them, not Michael, not Drew, not even Willow herself, could foresee the chaos about to unfold. Because the real shock wasn't that the wedding was happening. The real shock was what Willow would do when it did. Sonny had made promises before. But never one as absolute and thunderous as the vow he made now. After the fire at the pub nearly claimed Christina's life and left the community shaken, Sonny stood in the embers of destruction with one singular resolve: Sidwell would pay. Not just Sidwell, but anyone reckless enough to involve themselves in the madness he had unleashed. The chaos wasn't random anymore. It was focused, personal, targeted, and Sonny knew that obsession when he saw it. This wasn't just about power or territory. It was about tearing him down piece by piece, attacking the people he loved most in ways that weren't just physical but psychological. The madness Sidwell had been orchestrating was no longer hidden behind lawyers or financial maneuvers. It had taken form, raw, unhinged, and now dangerously unpredictable. The ripple effects had begun and Sonny felt them closing in like a noose around everyone tied to him. Daisy, once just a quiet soul seeking peace and faith, was now marked. What began with a disrupted baptism turned into sleepless nights, haunting calls, anonymous letters with veiled threats, and a growing paranoia she couldn't shake. Her sanctuary had been violated. Her safety stripped away, and she could feel the walls closing in. Sasha, who had spent years clawing her way back to sanity and security, now found herself once again pulled into the abyss. Her world, which had just begun to feel solid again, started to fracture. Strange men watching her from across the street. A car following her to the hospital. Her apartment. Broken into and left untouched except for one horrifying detail: her family photographs torn in half and laid across her bed. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. She didn't know from whom at first, but deep down, she knew. It was Sidwell. He had found her weak spots and was now pressing his thumb down, hard. Michael, too, was feeling the weight of Sidwell's obsession. Though he tried to appear composed and in control, he was unraveling. The custody battle had already strained every ounce of patience and strategy he had, but now new threats were creeping in. His personal records were being leaked to the media. His movements tracked. Private conversations recounted to him in anonymous texts. Photos of him and his children taken from outside his home. Nothing was safe. No boundary respected. And it wasn't just fear creeping in, it was helplessness. The sense that someone, somewhere, was always watching and always one step ahead. Sonny saw it all. He saw his family being backed into corners, one by one, and the rage building inside him was like fire under pressure. Sidwell's games had escalated far beyond corporate sabotage or legal corruption. This was personal. This was psychological warfare. And Sonny knew he couldn't fight it with lawyers or influence. Not anymore. This called for something darker. Something he hadn't had to summon in years. The part of himself that didn't hesitate, didn't negotiate. The part of him that ended threats permanently. Sidwell had made the mistake of underestimating what Sonny would become when backed against a wall. He thought Sonny was softer now, distracted by grandchildren, weakened by time. But what he didn't realize was that nothing made Sonny more dangerous than when he had something to protect. The horror of it all wasn't just what Sidwell was doing, it was how effective he was at doing it. He had turned faith into fear, love into surveillance, peace into silence. Daisy no longer slept through the night. Sasha kept knives near her bed. Michael had gone back to habits he thought he had buried, checking the locks 3 times. Sleeping with his phone always in his hand, second-guessing every person who came near his children. And still, Sidwell wasn't finished. There were whispers of something else coming. A deeper strike. One final blow to shatter the very structure Sonny had spent years building. No one knew what it was yet, but everyone felt it. A heaviness in the air. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm so violent it changes everything. Sonny didn't flinch. He didn't run. He called in favors. He pulled files from the shadows. He reactivated connections thought long dead. Because if Sidwell wanted to declare war, Sonny would answer it with something Sidwell had never experienced, an enemy who didn't need courts or laws or rules. An enemy who had nothing left to lose. And as he stood alone on the docks, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Sonny whispered to himself a vow that would soon become prophecy. Sidwell would fall. And when he did, it wouldn't be to a verdict or a headline. It would be to silence, darkness, and justice carved in the only language Sonny knew when someone hurt his family, vengeance without mercy. Emma had always trusted her instincts. Trained by her mother to question, to analyze, to remain calm under pressure, she had learned from a young age how to separate truth from manipulation. But nothing in her past had prepared her for Vaughn. He didn't arrive in her life like a threat. He arrived like a coincidence, a man with a kind voice, a casual presence in the park. And a lost dog that needed help. Emma, drawn by compassion and curiosity, didn't see the trap until it had already begun to close. Vaughn played his role with chilling precision, never once revealing his true intentions. He made her feel seen, understood, even needed. The dog, seemingly innocent, became their bond. A shared mission, a simple mystery to solve. But what Emma didn't know was that the dog was never lost, and Vaughn was never harmless. The adjustments began slowly. One minor distraction here, one offhand comment there. Vaughn began planting subtle doubts in Emma's mind. About Jason. About Jocelyn. About Dalton. He framed it all as concern, as casual observation, but his words carried poison. He'd mentioned how Jason had secrets, how the lab's files were incomplete, how certain people were using Emma without telling her the full truth. She told herself she was too smart to be manipulated. But Vaughn was patient, and Emma, despite all her strength, was alone. He made sure of that. The dog, at first a source of comfort, quickly became something more disturbing. It would bark in the middle of the night for no reason. It would growl at people Emma trusted. It scratched at doors no one had opened. And one day, Emma found something hidden in its collar, a tiny chip not for identification, but for tracking. By then, it was too late to pretend she wasn't being watched. Vaughn had used the dog not only to win her trust but to map her movements, her contacts, her research. She had brought the danger into her own life and nurtured it without realizing. The realization hit her hard. The man who smiled at her across coffee tables, who asked about her dreams, who praised her insights, he had been studying her, breaking her down. He wasn't there to protect her. He was there to unravel her. Vaughn's obsession wasn't romantic or emotional. It was strategic. Emma had become a key player in something far bigger than she understood, and Vaughn was the one sent to turn her into a pawn. The adjustments he made to her world weren't just psychological. He had tampered with her research files. He had altered her access logs. And worst of all, he had gained just enough of her trust to insert himself into the one thing she guarded most fiercely, her mission to expose Dalton. Now, as the pieces began to shift violently around her, Emma could feel the pressure closing in. The dog that once followed her loyally now sat by her door like a sentinel, its eyes too still, too knowing. The air in her apartment felt heavier. Phone calls dropped mid-conversation. A laptop camera blinked when it shouldn't. Vaughn had opened a door in her life, and what had stepped through wasn't just surveillance, it was control. This wasn't about affection. It was about power. And Emma was no longer sure who was running the investigation, her, or the man who had pretended to be her ally. What had started as a simple connection had become something monstrous. Vaughn's obsession had grown into something uncontainable, and Emma was now caught in a web she hadn't even seen forming. The dog, the apartment, the friendly texts, it was all part of the same terrifying orchestration. The danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. Tangible. Breathing. And it was in her home. Things were spiraling. Her notes were corrupted. Her contacts were distancing themselves. Jason wasn't returning her calls. Jocelyn seemed evasive. And Vaughn, always conveniently available, kept offering to help. But help from Vaughn now felt like standing closer to the fire to avoid the smoke. Emma realized with mounting dread that the true explosion hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. The groundwork had been laid. Vaughn had studied her habits, dismantled her support system, isolated her. And now, he was ready for the final move. She didn't know exactly what it would be, but she felt it like a storm in her bones. Maybe the dog was carrying something more than a tracker. Maybe Vaughn had installed surveillance equipment while she slept. Maybe the information she thought she had on Dalton had already been intercepted, rewritten, poisoned. Every step forward she had taken now felt like it had led her deeper into a maze designed by someone else. The situation had grown truly insane. Vaughn wasn't just manipulating her, he was orchestrating a psychological demolition of her world. Every adjustment he made, every shift in her routine, was calculated to erode her confidence and make her question her own reality. And it was working. Emma, once unshakable, was now on edge. Not just because of what she knew, but because of what she didn't know. What else had Vaughn touched? Who else was involved? And most terrifyingly, what would happen when he decided his game with her was finished? The danger wasn't approaching. It was already here. And Emma, caught between her instincts and the unraveling of everything she thought she controlled, was now running out of time to escape it.